Hello everyone, and today we will be learning about squares and square roots. What do we mean by squares and square roots? Okay, so when you hear the word square, you might think of a geometric figure like this. That's a square. In this case, it's not actually talking about this, but it is related to this. Okay, so a square just simply means you're multiplying the same number 2 times. And the way you notate a square is like this. This means this is 1 squared. 1 squared. And what that means is that you're multiplying 1 2 times. That's what the 2 here means. You're multiplying the 1 2 times. So that just means 1 times 1. So the answer is going to be 1. 1 squared equals 1. This is the answer. Okay. A lot of the students make the mistake of writing that as 1 times 2 and saying that the answer is 2. Okay, this is not correct. This is not correct. The squared just means you're multiplying this number 2 times. Okay, so that means 1 times 1 or just 1. So what would 2 squared mean? So again, 2 squared means 2 times 2. You're multiplying the 2 times. So the answer will be 4. How about 3 squared? 3 squared does not mean 3 times 2, as many students make the mistake of doing. This does not mean 3 times 2. This means 3 times 3. You're multiplying this number 2 times. So the answer is going to be 9. Okay, what do you think 10 squared would be then? 10 squared. This does not mean 10 times 2 or 20. Okay, I've said that many times before. This means 10 times 10. You're multiplying this number 2 times. So the answer is going to be 100. Okay, so this is what squares mean. Okay, you're multiplying the same number 2 times. Let me give you a question here. What would 7 squared equal? Okay, if you said 14, you are not correct. Okay, make sure don't do 7 times 2. Make sure you're doing 7 times 7, so the answer would be 49. Okay, so why is this called a square? It's because if you have a square like this, and the sides are going to be the same, by the definition of a square, and when you're finding the area of the square, you do this number times this number. You do the same number. So another way of writing that is 3 squared. Right? So this is why this is called square. When you're finding the area of a square, you use this method, okay, to find that area. Now, what do you do when you see a fraction squared? So for example, a fraction, 3/4 squared. What does that equal? Well, you do the same thing that you did with whole numbers. So that just means you're multiplying this number 2 times. Okay, so that just means 3/4 times 3/4. So 3 times 3 in the numerator is 9. 4 times 4 in the denominator is 16. Okay, so you use the same methods in squaring fractions. How about 1/2? What happens when you square 1/2? That just means 1/2 times 1/2. So that's going to be 1/4. Okay, again, some students make the mistake of writing that as 1/2 times 2 and canceling the 2 and saying that the answer is 1. And again, this is not correct. Okay, make sure you're squaring the number that is inside here. Okay, how about 5/9 squared? And I can show you an alternate way to solve this. You can either do this as 5 ninths times 5 ninths. Okay, and 5 times 5 is 25. 9 times 9 is 81. You can get your answer like this. Or another way to do this is you can like distribute the square to both the numerator and the denominator. So you can rewrite that as 5 squared divided by 9 squared. 5 squared is 25. That's 5 times 5. 9 squared is 81. That's 9 times 9. You get the same answer either way. So you can write it as multiplying two fractions together, or you can write it as distributing the square to the numerator and the denominator. Okay, so that's squares. Now, what do we mean by square roots? Okay, so when you see square roots, or think of square roots as the opposite of squares. So when you square a number, say 3, you're going to get a number. And when you do the square root to this number, you're going to go back to 3. Okay? And how you write the square root is like this. It looks kind of like a division symbol, like this kind of division symbol, but it's not actually that. So the square root of 9, a way of writing square root of 9 would be this. Okay, and this means which two numbers when multiplied, which two same numbers when multiplied together gives you 9. And from here you can see that 9 equals 3 times 3. So 3 multiplied with itself gives you 9. So the square root of 9 is going to be 3. Okay, so we've went this way with the squares from 3 to 9, and we go the other way from 9 to 3 with the square root. And the same thing, if you have a square root of 25, what would that equal? Well, what number times what number gives you 25? Which same numbers. And I'm sure you know that 5 times 5 equals 25. So the square root of 25 is going to equal 5. Okay, let's try one more. Square root of 64. Okay, which two numbers, when multiplied with itself, gives you 64? And the answer would be 8. Okay, 8 times 8 gives you 64. So the square root of 64 is going to equal 8. Okay, and you can do the same thing with fractions as well. When you take the square root of a fraction, let's say like this one, think of the numerator and the denominator separately. So think of this as doing the square root of the numerator, square root of 16, and then the square root of the denominator. Okay, what is the square root of 16? In other words, what times what gives you 16? Well, you know that 4 times 4 gives you 16. So that means the numerator there is going to be 4. Okay, square root of 16 is 4. What is the square root of 81? What times what gives you 81? And you'll know that 9 times 9 gives you 81. So the square root of 81 is going to be 9. So in this way, you can also find the square root of fractions. You can just take the square root of the numerator and then divide that by the square root of the denominator. Okay, so think of square roots as the opposites of squares. And again, when you see a square root of 16 like this, many students make the mistake of thinking that as 16 divided by 2 and say that the answer is 8. And of course, this is not correct. This means what times what gives you 16. The same number. These two numbers have to be the same. And 4 times 4 gives you 16. So the square root of 16 is going to be 4, not 8. Okay, so please don't make this mistake of dividing by 2 with square roots And don't make the mistake of multiplying by 2 for squares.